Hornet Fat-FET is a fat-sounding virtual vintage analog compressor whose compression circuit software model is based on the famous Universal Audio 1176 LN Blue Stripe FET hardware compressor from the 1960s. It's a really great sounding CPU-friendly little plugin that works well on everything from drums and bass to guitar and vocals, providing a quick and easy way to get the sound of classic analog dynamics into your projects. To demonstrate how it works, we're going to begin by compressing a drum loop. So we've imported the file entitled Fat-FET-drums.wav onto an audio channel. You can find this audio file in the tutorial files folder. You should see the Fat-FET in the list of available plugins. So insert it across the audio track. The plugin's default setting passes audio through virtually unaffected. Begin by adjusting the input level slider until the blue input meters are showing a decent level. If either side flashes red, it means that the input stage is in danger of clipping, so pull the level back down a little until there's little or no red to be seen. The compression ratio represents the amount by which any input signal above the threshold will be reduced in volume. A ratio of 2:1 means that for every 2 dB that exceeds the threshold, only 1 dB will be passed through to the output stage. So that we can see the compressor really working in this example, set the ratio at 8:1. Not much will be happening to the audio yet, as the threshold control is still at its maximum value. As you start to bring the threshold level down to around minus 42.5 dB, more of the input level will exceed it, and you'll start to see and hear some gain reduction happening, as shown in the meter at the top of the interface. Now use the output level slider to tailor the amount of gain applied after compression. This is necessary because when a signal is compressed, it gets quieter, so some form of output level adjustment is usually required. Again, set the slider as high as it will go before the meters start to flash red. The attack control is currently set at its minimum 0.02 milliseconds setting, but because the gain reduction is kicking in so quickly, it's softening the attack of the kick drum. Set the attack to 0.4 milliseconds and notice how the front of the kick and snare harden up. This is because the drum hit's initial attack is now coming through a split second before the compression is applied. The release is also currently set at its minimum of 50 milliseconds, meaning that normal levels are resumed extremely quickly once the signal falls back down below the threshold level. As you turn up the release control to around 600 milliseconds, notice the smearing effect it has as the gain reduction triggered by the peaks of the kick and snare is maintained for longer. If we now toggle the effect bypass, you can easily hear how the compression has totally changed the sound of the kick and snare, but also brought up the relative level of elements that were previously much quieter, such as the hi-hats and fill snare beats. The overall effect is one of making the loop much more cohesive and easier to balance within a mix. Now let's see how it responds to a vocal. Import the file Fat-FET-vocal.wav into your session and insert an instance of Fat-FET across it. The vocal is made up of 2 phrases. The first soft,
"When it comes to loving me,"
and the second much louder,
"You got no imagination."
First, set up the input level as before using the input level slider. There's no visible numerical value attached to this control, so just nudge it around in the area shown until only the briefest glimpse of red can be seen in the meters at the loudest point of the vocal.
"When it comes to loving me, you got no imagination. When it comes to loving me, you got no imagination. When it comes to loving me, you got no imagination.
The difference in level between the peaks in each phrase is quite extreme. Logic's channel meter is telling us that it's about 9 dB. So to bring them closer together in loudness, we'll start by dialing in a moderately high ratio of 6:1 so that we can easily tell when the compressor starts working.
When it comes to loving me, you got no imagination.
We want the first phrase compressed as little as possible, so dial the threshold down as low as you can without the first phrase triggering the gain reduction meter.
When it comes to loving me, when it comes to loving me, you got no. When it comes to loving me, you got no imagination. When it comes to loving me.
This turns out to be around minus 24.2 dB in this case. At this setting, the loudest part of the second phrase gets reduced by about 4 dB as shown by the gain reduction meter.
When it comes to loving me, you got no imagination.
For a more extreme reduction, crank the ratio up to its highest setting of 20:1.
When it comes to loving me, you got no imagination.
This produces an indicated maximum gain reduction on the second phrase of around 10 to 12 dB.
You got no imagination.
Making the difference between the two phrases much more manageable.
You got no imagination.
The peaks in the second phrase happen quite rapidly, so turn the release up to around 700 milliseconds to smooth out the gain reduction as it plays.
When it comes to loving me, you got no imagination.
Keep the attack set to its fastest setting so that the compressor catches the transients at the beginning of the phrase. With the difference between the loudest parts of each phrase now indicated at around 3 dB, we can make one final tweak to the output setting to raise the overall volume of both parts together.
You got no imagination.
While the first phrase is about as loud as it was before, the second is now considerably more restrained.
You got no imagination. When it comes to loving me, when it comes to loving me, you got no imagination.
For our last example, import the audio file Fat-FET bass.wav from the tutorial files folder. Insert an instance of Fat-FET over the channel and set the input level as before. For a smooth compression, set the ratio to 4:1 and set the threshold to about minus 33.1 dB. Toggle the bypass on and off to hear the effect as the audio plays. The staccato notes are now quieter, bringing them into line with the volume of the long notes. To retain some of their punch, raise the attack control to around 0.1 milliseconds. This allows some of the initial transients through before compression. For a more squashed sound, just increase the ratio or lower the threshold.